Well, hello everybody. My name is Burnside. I'm the principal at Caton and Brookhouse Hall. It's a great joy to be with you for these Lenten talks, or this third one. I hope the series has been going well so far. And here we reach the crucifixion. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 27. I'm going to share a screen with you, if I can just make this work. I hope you can see that okay. Just something other than my mug to look at as we go through. So Matthew chapter 27, let's read from verse 27. You may wish to have the chapter open in front of you as we go through, but I'll focus, I think, for the sake of time, just on these few verses. So Matthew 27 from verse 27. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand, and then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spat on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. And after they'd mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. And then they led him away to crucify him. Some of you may remember, this is a few years ago now, it was 2003. The war in Iraq was beginning, March 2003. And it came out a few years later that personnel in the United States Army and the Central Intelligence Agency committed a series of human rights violations against detainees in Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. You may remember some of these very disturbing images that came out at the time. There was accounts of physical, sexual abuse, torture, rape, murder, just some awful stuff. And that was just a relatively recent example of an instinct we see at work here. And that is what bored soldiers do to prisoners in their supposed care. That's what we're seeing in Matthew 27. We're seeing men who would, I suspect, just be normal, relatively normal men, normal family men, a long way from home, bored, frustrated, and taking out their anger on a vulnerable and defenseless prisoner. And we see in this account, I think, as Jesus wears this crown of thorns, as he journeys towards his death and the crucifixion, we see three things I'd just like us to think about over these next few minutes together. One is this: we just see the nature, the horror of sin. We see that it's pretty universal. The governor's soldiers took Jesus. Now, these would have been Gentiles, not Jews, who made this crown, probably locally recruited rather than Italians, but they'll be Gentiles. So this was not just a Jewish initiative that led Jesus to the path to crucifixion. Sin was both a Gentile and a Jewish issue. We know that, but let's just remind ourselves of it. It's universal. What we read in these verses is deeply ugly, isn't it? This involves the whole company of soldiers. Now, a whole company would technically have been about 600 men. The commentators think it's more likely to have been around about, in this circumstance, 200. So we might be talking 200 against one here. These were bullies, troops, bored, frustrated. This same nature of horror will be going on in prisons across the world tonight. It had a strong racist undertone, Gentiles mocking the Jew who claims to be king. Sin is horrific, it's universal, it's ugly. There's also a hideous creativity often to sin, isn't there? There's a cruel genius going on in these verses. This crown of thorns both mocks Jesus for the crime he's been found guilty of, claiming to be king of the Jews, chapter 27, verse 11. When the only acceptable answer to the question, who is king, would have been Caesar. And there's a creativity in crafting a punishment from a symbol of the crime, a crown of thorns. There's something clever about that. It both mocks him and it wounds him simultaneously. It's already a judgment on his supposed crime. And these soldiers are clever, aren't they? They improvise the three essential trappings of royal regalia: a scarlet robe, a staff, and a crown. And all three say, "Oh, you're a king, are you? Well, then you need these three things: a robe, a crown, a staff." And then all three are used to humiliate him. To put the robe on, he is first stripped. They take the staff that is supposedly a symbol of power and authority, and they strike him on the head with it, verse 30, again and again. And the crown is the work of real genius. It mocks his claim to be king, and it simultaneously does him damage. They take a symbol of royalty and majesty, and they just turn it into something painful and degrading. And there's something horribly clever about that, creative. And have you noticed that instinct in us? Sin can often take God's creativity that we're blessed with, that's intended to beautify and bless, and sin can take creativity and instead use it to brutalize and batter. And that's what we're seeing in this little story too. And of course, this whole initiative is rooted in rebellion. These soldiers might be playing a well-established game with Jesus, of a first century game called Basilicon. This is Dio Cassius. He was a second century Roman historian, 2nd century AD Roman historian. And in Dio Cassius's history, he tells us about a springtime festival game where a prisoner would be dressed as a king for a night and then paid mock honor and granted his last wishes, and then he'd be whipped and killed. And the prisoner was used as a kind of way of expressing the underlying resentment that we often feel at those who are in authority over us. Let's pick a random prisoner no one cares about, pretend he's a king, mock him as a king, and then kill him. And he becomes a kind of surrogate for us. We can take out our frustration on those who are in authority over us by killing this poor prisoner that we're pretending to be a king. And some scholars wonder if that's what is being enacted here by these soldiers, this Basilican rite that we know was in force a couple of hundred years later. The most likely location for what's happening in Matthew 27 is a fort called the Antonia Barracks, which was next to the temple area in Jerusalem. These days, a convent, the Sisters of Zion convent, sits on top of it. Some of you may have visited it. But the barracks underneath it have been excavated. They now look like that. And on the floor, the archaeologists have found soldiers' graffiti scratched into the stone paving. And one of this bit of graffito is the letter B next to what looks like a crown of thorns. In these Jerusalem barracks, Michael Green, in his commentary on Matthew, asks this question: could that stand for Basilicon, the king's game? And could these stones have witnessed the howling of the mob and the pathetic maneuvers of the governor, the cruelty of the soldiers, and the silent suffering of the Christ? At all events, Matthew wants us to know that just as the Jews had mocked and abused Jesus, so did the Gentiles, with only greater violence and cruelty. There's a kind of weird thrill, I guess, in killing a king, isn't there? Rejecting the one in authority over you. Of course, it's the root of original sin, where Adam and Eve reject God's authority and choose to be self-governing. Now, these soldiers don't know what they're doing at this point. They're not killing a mock king, as they think they are. They're killing a real king. In fact, they're killing the king of kings. They're killing God. But in doing that, they're doing what every unredeemed human heart wants to do, rejecting God's presence and authority over us, getting him out of our lives. The crown of thorns shows human sin in all its ugliness. And it's just a trailer for the crucifixion that will be following. We're already saved, I would guess, most of us who are watching this today, but there's that biblical element, isn't there, that salvation is a past event and it's a future event. One day we will be fully redeemed and restored, but it's also a present event as well. We're being saved. There'll still be traces of that old nature, that selfishness, that rebellion against authority in each of us. And let's remember that this Easter time. This is a still from Mel Gibson's film, The Passion of the Christ, which many of you will have seen. But do you remember this moment in The Passion of the Christ where we see a hand holding the nail that's driven into Christ's palm. And in the making of the movie, that was the director's hand. That's Mel Gibson's hand you see holding that nail, because he wanted to remember that it was his sin, in part, that nailed the Lord Jesus to that cross. So as we look at the crucifixion, we're seeing, of course, the horror of human sin, just kind of symbolized in this crown of thorns. What else do we see? Well, we see the solution to sin. In our Bibles, the Old Testament finishes the book of Malachi. In the ordering of the Old Testament books in the Jewish scriptures, their scriptures they're all the same books, but they're in a different order. So the final book in the Jewish scriptures is 2 Chronicles, and this is the end of 2 Chronicles. They mocked God's messengers, despised his words, scoffed at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord was aroused against his people, and there was no remedy. 2 Chronicles 36:16, that's the note on which the Hebrew scriptures close. And of course, what we know is the crown of thorns and the crucifixion, the resurrection that follow. These illustrate that there is a remedy to the consistent rebellion of the human heart. The crown of thorns symbolize it. It's simultaneously an instrument of torture, and it's a symbol of rule. And this is how the horror of sin will be resolved. This is the solution to sin. The perfect divine King of Kings suffers death as a substitute for us. He pays the penalty we deserve. And we see that in this beautiful symbol, horrible but beautiful symbol of the crown of thorns. There's a royalty there and there's a suffering there. And we see Jesus embodied in both of them. So Jesus, the suffering servant, we know as Isaiah 53, despised and rejected, a man of suffering, familiar with pain. He took up our pain and bore our suffering. We considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted, but he was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we're healed. Jesus is our suffering servant, but he's also the King of Kings. One day, the entire universe will bow down to Jesus as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And interestingly, in this account in Revelation 19, John sees Jesus with all 3 of the items these soldiers make for him back in Matthew 27. On his head are many crowns. He is dressed in a robe, a scarlet robe, dipped in blood, and he carries an iron scepter. There they are again, robe, scepter, crown. Except this time, there's no mistaking who this is. This is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And Jesus is willing to endure the pain and the insults and the shame on all our accounts. I find it fascinating that this crown that these soldiers improvised is made of thorns. It's a crown of thorns. Why do we have thorns on our earth? Well, if you remember, thorns are part of the result of the fall. We have thorns because of the curse that came upon the land after Adam and Eve originally sinned. So these thorns become a symbol of our sin, and the Lord Jesus Christ wears our sin. He carries our sin upon himself. And he is the suffering servant, the King of Kings, whose death can become the solution to sin, the only possible solution to sin. It's just such a beautiful image, isn't it, of who Jesus is and what he came to accomplish. It was intended as a mockery, but this crown of thorns, it was just such a beautiful picture of what we needed to happen for our sin to be forgiven and us to be restored in a relationship with God. Let me think with you about one more thing before I finish. We see a glimpse in this account in Matthew 27 of our calling now. What do you think the earliest visual representation of Jesus is? The earliest picture ever drawn of the Lord Jesus? Well, a lot of scholars think it's this. This is a bit of graffiti scratched on the wall of a Roman house. And It's 2nd century, and it shows a man in profile on the left there, gesturing towards a donkey-headed figure, and you can see he's on a cross. And beneath it, the anonymous artist, the graffiti artist, has scrawled, "Alexamenos worships his God." So somewhere in 2nd century Rome, there was a Christian called Alexamenos who was being bullied for being a Christian, suffering for being a Christian, and he's being accused of worshipping a donkey god, a god who was so dumb he allowed himself to be crucified on a Roman cross. And on one level, this is just a lovely reminder, isn't it, that the kind of persecution that we may from time to time suffer as Christians, the kind of mockery that we may sometimes suffer as Christians, is nothing new. It's been going on since the 2nd century. Paul's great priority, do you remember, was his surpassing worth in his life was to know Christ Jesus, my Lord. And if he's really going to know Jesus, to know somebody well, you share experiences with them. That's true of any friendship, isn't it? The more shared experiences we have with a friend, the better we know them, the better we understand them, the closer to them we will be. And that's why Paul can say this, Philippians 3, I want to know Christ. I want to know the power of his resurrection. I want to know participation in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, and so somehow attaining to the resurrection from the dead. So sharing in the sufferings of Christ is all part of experiencing the surpassing worth of knowing him. We're going to get to know Jesus better when we share his sufferings. Through suffering, we go deeper in our relationship with him. The more we understand the kind of pain he suffered, the better we will get to know him, the closer to him we will be. Jesus says, doesn't he, in John 15, if they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you. And it's the case often, we'll know this from our own experience, we'll know it from Christians we've shared with. The people who often write or speak most deeply and sweetly about the preciousness of Jesus are the people who've suffered most deeply and most sweetly with Jesus. Over 100 years ago, this man, Horatius Bonar, the Scottish pastor and hymn writer, wrote a little book called Night of Weeping, subtitled When God's Children Suffer. And Horatio and his wife Jane knew what they were talking about. 5 of their children had died. He said his goal in writing the book was to minister to the saints, to seek to bear their burdens, to bind up their wounds, and to dry up at least some of their tears. And he says this in this little book, it's written by one who is seeking himself to profit by trial and trembles lest trial should pass by as the wind over the rock, leaving the rock as hard as ever. It's written by one who would in every sorrow draw near to God that he may know him more, and who is not unwilling to confess that as yet he knows but little. I think that's a remarkable perspective on suffering. He says, if my life is a rock and suffering is the wind, the trials of the wind, I don't want the wind to pass over my life, leaving me unchanged, leaving me as hard as ever. He says, I want in every sorrow to draw near to God that I may know him more. I think that's a great definition of sharing in the sufferings of Jesus Christ. Now, we need to read this carefully. It's not a mandate for masochism. We shouldn't deliberately seek pain, and we certainly shouldn't deliberately inflict it on others. We should seek to relieve pain wherever possible. If something hurts and it can be fixed, let's fix it. Let's pray for the relief of pain and suffering, ours and that of other people. But being human and being a Christian means that sometimes things will hurt. We will suffer. Now, we might suffer like Alexamenos did at the hands of those he lives amongst and witnesses to who mock him for being a Christian. We might suffer like Paul did with a physical pain, a thorn in the flesh that the Lord left him with for a purpose. We might suffer like Horatio Bonar did through bereavement and loss. But in whatever the nature of our pain is, in the midst of it, let's make sure we ask ourselves this question. Did Jesus suffer like this? Can I see this season of suffering as a way to get to know Jesus better, to share his experience, to know and love him more deeply? And to do that will result in a blessing that will far outlast the pain. Now, I don't know what it's like in your Christian community at Caton. In my experience, that's a conversation Christians don't often have with each other when we suffer. Maybe that's my lacking, or the lacking of those around me sometimes. But when we share stories of pain, there's often a lot of sympathy, a lot of empathy, a lot of practical care and compassion, all of which, of course, are fantastic. But how often do we help one another know Jesus better as we suffer and see that as sharing in his sufferings? So in this chapter, we see Jesus wearing a crown of thorns on his journey to the cross. And as he does, culminating in the crucifixion itself, we see the horror of sin, we see the solution to sin, and we see a glimpse of our calling now, to be willing to suffer and to share in the sufferings of Jesus, that we can both show the world him and we can also deepen our relationship with him. Let me just finish with these lovely words from a hymn you will know well. I will not boast in anything, no gifts, no power, no wisdom, but I will boast in Jesus Christ, in his death and resurrection. What should I gain from his reward? I cannot give an answer, but this I know with all my heart, his wounds have paid my ransom. Thank you, and may you have a really blessed Easter time. And I didn't say it at the start, and I meant to, forgive me, but thank you again for all the partnership, the love, the support and the prayers that you extend to us here at Cape. And we deeply, deeply appreciate your partnership in the gospel. Happy Easter.